Today we've got the rules overview for Dungeon Command, and this is going to be a little bit different than other rules videos that I've done and that I will do, in that I'm going to have one rules video for all of the faction packs for Dungeon Command. Right now I'm doing Blood of Grumsh, but this same rules video will be applicable to all the Dungeon Command faction packs, and so when I release future series based on those, the same rules video will be lumped in with them. So when you're watching it, you'll see Blood of Grumsh and Heart of Cormyr as the two faction packs I'm using to give examples. But just keep in mind that it does work with any of the other ones as well. So without anything further, let's get right into it. The first thing you're going to need to do when you start playing Dungeon Command is you're going to have to choose your commander. Now, in this case, let's say we chose Lokar, and once you have your commander chosen, a few things you need to look at on the card. They've got, every commander is going to have their own leader power right here. That's going to affect in some way the creatures under their command, and is usually some sort of ongoing effect. After that, you've got the creature hand size. This is the maximum hand size that you're allowed to have as far as the number of creatures in your hand at any given time. You'll start the game with this many, and at the end of every round, you will draw back up to that number. Next, look at the starting order hand size. Now, this is just the initial starting hand size of your order cards. In this case, you'll start with 3, but then there's no maximum hand size after that. As you draw more order cards, you don't have to play them, you don't have to discard them, you just keep going along. Over here, you're going to see your starting morale, and down here, your starting leadership. Now, morale and leadership are the only two stats for the commanders, and what's going to happen is you'll start, in this case, at 11. And as the game progresses, you're either going to lose or gain morale. If you get down to 0 morale, you lose the game. Leadership affects how many creatures you're able to deploy at any given time. Okay, now let's take a look at these creature cards. The most important part of this creature card, or one of the most important parts, is going to be the level right there. The reason why that's so important is you're going to add all the levels of all the creatures you have deployed to determine how many more creatures you're going to be able to put on the board. Basically, when you add the levels up, they cannot exceed the current leadership level of your commander. Next, we've got hit points right there in the top right corner. This guy's got 120 hit points. That's pretty high. He's going to be a pretty tough one to kill. Okay, underneath his name, you see several keywords here. Evil, humanoid, and orc. Every creature is going to have their own keywords, and those are affected, or those determine whether or not the creature can be affected by certain order cards or other effects in the game. Right here, you're going to find a creature's abilities. In this case, the orc cleric has Constitution and Wisdom. There's several different ones. There's 6 of them actually: Strength, Dexterity, Constitution, Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma. And those will come into play when playing an order card on your creature. Okay, now right here you see this creature only has melee damage. You can see the sword right there. Certain creatures will have range damage as well, such as an archer. You can see they've got the bow and arrow right there as well. In this case, he deals 20 range damage, and then the other number right there in the small parentheses is going to be the range, or the distance that this ranged attack can be effective. In this box right here, you'll find the rules text involving any special effects or powers this creature has. And then down here is the speed of the creature, which determines how quickly they can move across the board. So now we've got our board set up, ready to go for a 2-player game. And we're going to need to deploy some creatures at the beginning of the game. Now, you must deploy at least one, but you do not have to deploy all possible creatures. So right here we've got a leadership of 9. And let's say we drew a starting hand of an orc cleric, an orc archer, and a wereboar. Now you can see the levels. We can deploy up to 9 levels of creatures because our leadership is at 9. Now I could deploy just the orc archer if I wanted to, but let's say I'm going to go ahead and deploy the full complement of possible creatures, the maximum amount. So we'll do the orc cleric and the wereboar. So what you'll do is, in front of you, you'll place face up the creatures you're going to deploy, the creature cards, and then you'll go over to the board and put them on the board. And the key when placing them is just to make sure they stay within the starting space. So you can put them here, here, back here, wherever you feel is best. So let's say we put him there and the werebore there. And you've got your starting deployment. And the final thing you'll do is you only have one card in your hand. You have a creature hand size of 3, so you'll need to draw back up to your hand size of 3 cards, and now you're good to go. So one other thing to mention with the initial startup deployment of the creatures, the player who's going first will deploy all of their creatures that they wish to deploy, and then the second player will deploy all of theirs. Now before we get into the actual gameplay, let's take a quick look at order cards. Right here we've got a order card called Overseer's Whip. Now you'll see up here it has a level. What that's referring to is the minimum level of the creature that this card can be used on. Right here you're going to see that the ability that the creature needs to have is going to be Wisdom. Okay, so for instance, this werebore is level 4, so it does meet the level requirement. However, it has Strength and Constitution. It does not have Wisdom as an ability. Whereas this cleric right here has level 5, which does match up here, and it has Wisdom. So Overseer's Whip can be used on the Orc cleric. Now you'll see that you actually will attach this card to that creature. Down here, you add 2 to the speed of each creature you control. The last thing on this card I should bring your attention to is the type of action it is. Up there you see it's a standard action, right there. And there are 2 other types of actions. It could be either a minor or an immediate action. And we'll get into what that means a little bit later. Now we're going to get into the 4 phases of play. Those are the refresh phase, the activate phase, the deployment phase, and the cleanup phase. One thing to keep in mind, and you'll hear it as I'm talking about it in a minute, but you untap your creatures during the refresh phase at the beginning of your turn, as well as in the cleanup phase at the end of your turn. So you'll have completely untapped creatures throughout your entire activation, and then in order to react to anything that other players might throw your way. So you're not having to decide during your turn whether to use a standard action and tap your creature when maybe you need that creature untapped to react to another player. It's something that's a little unusual. A lot of people, when they read it the first time, I know people that I've played with thought it was strange that you would untap your creatures, get to do all actions with them, and then untap them again at the end of your turn. But that is actually the way the game's played. In the refresh phase, you would resolve any start of turn effects, which here we don't have any. If you had tapped creature cards, you would untap them. And finally, you would draw an order card and add that to your hand. During the activate phase, you must declare the creature you're going to activate, complete the entire activation for that creature before moving on to another creature. When a creature is activated, you can use any or all of the following actions. You can move a creature up to his speed. So in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Even though the Orc Cleric has a speed of 6, he's only going to move 5 to get to his enemies. You can also use an order card. So maybe in this case, I will play Overseer's Whip onto the Orc Cleric and attach it to him. Like so. And finally, you can make an attack or use any of your creature powers. So in this case, the Orc Cleric would probably make a melee attack against one of his enemies. Alright, let's talk a little bit more about movement in detail. When you move, as I've said before, you can move up to your speed, though you don't have to use your full speed. You are allowed to move diagonal, like this. However, when moving diagonal, you're not allowed to move diagonally across corners, like this. In this case, you'd have to go here and then here. When moving, the moment you become adjacent to an enemy, you must stop right there. So the werebore could move around the dwarf this way, But if he went here, he's now adjacent and has to stop right there. If you start your movement adjacent to an enemy, your speed is considered 1, and you therefore can only move 1 away. So if that's the case, plan your movement carefully. On the other hand, if you start adjacent to an enemy, you manage to kill this enemy first, then your speed is considered back to normal. When a large creature is moving, you choose one square to use as the point of reference and move based on that. So for instance, if we were using this square, then diagonal would be here, because this square right here is diagonal to this one. And so you'd also count off that way. So for him to move 3 spaces would be 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. This triangle symbol right here is considered difficult terrain. Difficult terrain costs 2 movement points to get through. So the werebore would have to count 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Square symbols like this count as obstacles. Obstacles count as difficult terrain, they block line of sight, and they also provide cover to creatures that are currently within that obstacle. So for instance here, this archer has no line of sight against the werebore, and therefore cannot fire any ranged attacks at him. The werebore, if he's moving, 1, 2, 3. Again, difficult terrain, therefore counts for 2 speed. While the werebore is on that square, he now has cover from ranged attacks. So the archer can fire at him. However, if the werebore's card is untapped, he can tap it, at which point the werebore has successfully dodged the ranged attack. So you can see that it'll take at least 2 ranged attacks to be able to damage an individual that is in cover. The final type of terrain is hazardous terrain. Now this counts as difficult terrain as well. However, when you enter hazardous terrain, you're going to take 10 damage. Also, if you end your turn in hazardous terrain, you will take an additional 10 damage. So for the werebore, it would be 1, 2 for speed, due to it being difficult terrain. He would take 10 damage, and then 3, 4, and so on. If you have a creature with flying, such as this copper dragon, he'll ignore hazardous terrain, obstacles, and difficult terrain when making any sort of move. A few other quick points on movement. With flying, I didn't mention it a moment ago, but flying cannot ignore walls. So you are still contained by, if you're in an underground setting, in a dungeon setting, any of the walls you see, you are constrained by them. And in the outdoor setting, the cliff faces are considered too high to fly over for purposes of the battle, apparently. So you're constrained by those cliff faces as well. There is another form of movement called burrow that only a few creatures have. None of the ones in my current faction packs have burrow, but what that does is essentially the same as flying, but it ignores walls. The idea is you're digging under the walls. So burrow is kind of like flying, only better in a lot of ways. It has all the advantages of flying, but with that addition of ignoring walls. Also, some order cards and creature actions will have a phrase of you shift a creature or you slide a creature. Really, those two are used somewhat interchangeably, except a lot of times one of them will refer to you being able to move another person's creatures as well as your own. But basically, just know that when you're shifting or sliding a creature, they're not affected by enemy characters. They don't stop when they become adjacent to one. They would slide on past or shift on past that character. Hey, Baker here from the editing room floor. And by editing room, I mean my kitchen. And by floor, I mean the table in my kitchen. Apparently, I misplaced 2 brief segments for this video, and instead of resetting up the board and everything in the room that I was filming that in, I'm just going to convey one of those segments to you right now, and then the other one you'll see in a little bit. As far as line of sight goes, the way that you judge if you have both line of sight and a clear shot in this game is from any corner of the square that your character is on, draw a straight line to all the corners of the square the character you're attacking is on. If you have a clear path to all four corners, then you have line of sight and a clear shot. If you have a clear path to only some of the corners, then you have line of sight without a clear shot. And now we'll talk about what happens when you don't have a clear shot. This archer does have line of sight on the werebore. However, he's unable to draw a straight line to all four corners of the werebore space. So what this means is the werebore also has cover here. Even though he's out in the open, thematically I suppose he's ducking behind this wall here. So what that means is, just as if the werebore was in an obstacle space, he's able to tap his card to dodge a ranged attack because of the fact that the archer does not have full line of sight to all four corners of the werebore space. When it comes to order cards, there is a special rule called Assist that can help you use stronger order cards with creatures that might not normally be able to use them. With this Orc Drudge, you can see that he's a level 1 creature with Strength and Constitution. Now, if you wanted to play this order card, Slice, against that dwarf using the Drudge, you wouldn't be able to normally, due to it being a level 2 Strength card, and again, the Drudge only has level 1 in Strength. However, the Drudge is also adjacent to the werebore, and the werebore has Strength and is level 4. And what this lets you do, if you tap the werebore, you now add his level to the Drudge's level, bringing him up to a level 5, which is more than enough to be able to use Slice, which is a level 2 standard action. Now, when a creature dies, you lose morale equal to that creature's level. So let's say that the dwarf managed to kill this werebore. We can see that the werebore's level is 4, and therefore your morale track, which is currently at 11, would drop to 7. On the other hand, if you decide that that is an unacceptable loss, you can decide to cower. Now what that means is if the dwarf was going to deal 20 damage as the killing blow to the werebore, then the werebore could decide to cower. And what that means is, instead of dying, you would lose 1 morale per 10 points of damage that the werebore would have taken. So if he was taking 20 damage, instead of losing the 4 for him dying, you would lose 2, and he would still be alive. Okay, so this is probably a good time to bring up the 3 different types of actions in the game. You have standard, minor, and immediate. A standard action can only take place on your turn, and each creature can use 1 standard action per turn. The standard actions will tap the creature, and therefore you can't use another standard action because you're tapped. Unless, of course, you have some other action that untaps your creature, and then they're available for another standard action. A minor action also can only be used on your turn. However, you can use an unlimited number of minor actions, and they can be used regardless of whether or not the creature is tapped or untapped. The immediate actions can be used on either your turn or another player's turn. However, they're most frequently used on another player's turn. They act as a interrupt or a counter a lot of times to something that that player is doing. A lot of times they're used to absorb damage done or something of that nature. And immediate actions do not tap your character, and so therefore can be used however many times you have one available to you. Once your activation phase is over, you'll enter the deploy phase. The first thing you'll do is increase your leadership by 1. Then if you'd like to, you can deploy any new creatures that fit within your leadership ability. They go into your starting area anywhere you like, at which point you'll then enter the cleanup phase where you would untap any creatures, you would draw back up to your creature hand size, and you would handle any end of turn effects that you might have. The game will finally end if morale goes all the way to 0, or if you end your turn with absolutely no creatures on the board. Okay, Baker here again from the editing room floor. Hope you enjoyed our rules video. We'll be bringing a gameplay video to you fairly soon. It'll just be a 2-player. This game does have some a 3-player and 4-player variant that you can play with, but I'm not going to be covering that as I've never had an opportunity to play that way yet. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to leave any comments in the YouTube comments below. Look me up on BGG if you want to, and we'll see you next time.